Jen will tell you about that in a moment. Our presenter this morning is, see all the information directly right here. She has quite the long resume of information. The Caputi state education instructor herself, and then she's an attorney as well. So she'll be presenting the CE class for all of you. I think everybody's got food. You good? All right. I like it. It works out well when you're eating because it keeps you guys quiet for a little while. Pretty good. So I can get more information directly in. So I would like to present Jen up to present her presentation for you guys, and I look forward to this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. Thanks for coming. As mentioned, there is a 1 credit certificate that I'll email to everybody. Actually come from Ali Mora. So in the subject, we'll have the course name, 1 credit, and if you don't see it in your email, check your spam or junk. But we do send them out fairly quickly right after the class. So I would say by tomorrow, the end of the business day tomorrow. What is today, Wednesday? Yes, so by tomorrow. And this course, so it was picked because it's FHA month. It's actually a longer course. I have 3-hour credit, all different parts, because as you can imagine, FHA is a very involved, complicated subject with lots of information. So I had to customize this one for more marketing purposes, FHA marketing. Okay, so diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI. So I'll try to stay on course with the marketing. I try to go on my slides. I can be a talker, so I don't want to bore you with any unnecessary information. Okay. So, but I encourage any questions, any experiences you could share, particularly on this topic, because everyone's, from what I've learned and what I read, it's an evolving matter. There's a lot of times where people are facing first-time situations with some of these matters. So anything you can share to keep, just keep stories going. It's a good way to learn. Feel free. Don't be shy. The only dumb question is the question not asked. So jump in if you want to. So Jen Caputi, Caputi Real Estate Education, and Caputi Law Office. Okay. So target marketing. Okay, focus on a segment of prospective customers means a more effective targeted message, which ultimately yields a better bottom line. Okay, that's what a lot of business professionals do. I'm an attorney. I focus on real estate. Okay, as agents, ones who have been practicing or in the business for a long time, you may have had a different marketing plan years ago, but that marketing plan is now impacted due to FHA. Okay, so target marketing, we're going to talk about that. Unlawful target marketing and lawful target marketing. Okay, so the Fair Housing Act. FHA says it's unlawful to discriminate against members of certain protected classes in providing real estate services, even if these groups don't fit with your target strategy. Specifically, FHA states you can't make, print, or publish or cause to be made, printed, or published any notice, statement, or advertisement with respect to the sale or rental of a dwelling that indicates any preference, limitation, or discrimination based on, now we have our protected classes, race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, or national origin. So those are our protected classes, which should not be breaking news to any of you, but if it is, there you go. Or an intention to make any such preference, limitation, or discrimination. So do you guys look at that as a broad definition or a narrow definition? It's pretty broad. This is pretty broad, okay? So you have to be aware, and you can't plead ignorance. That's not going to be a defense. I didn't know that I was discriminating. That is not a defense. It is your duty to know. You're a realtor, you've had a code of ethics, and it's the law. Okay? So the history of FHA is fascinating. Pre-FHA Act, other part of the course. In my older days, I love history. So learning about the history of FHA and how it became about. is incredible at what did take place to what now is prevented. And you, as agents who are on the forefront of selling real estate or renting real estate, have a huge duty to make sure you're complying with FHA. So that's another cost. The sex based on sex, the sexual orientation and gender identity and sexual harassment. So FHA, does anyone have an idea of when that actually became enforced or enacted, the act, roughly?
Less than 5 years ago or something.
Okay, so that is this part. So, but in the 60s is really when it was enforced in an act. This part, okay, where you can't discriminate based on sex, the sexual orientation and gender identity was recent, 2020. So up until 2020, before this case, and before the Supreme Court issued the decision, which held that the prohibition against sex discrimination includes sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, and then it was also an executive order signed by Biden. So I just point that out because it is more recent than actual other protected classes. It expanded that definition of sex. So persons who identify LGBTQ and believe they experience housing discrimination because of their actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity can assert their rights under the Fair Housing Act and file a complaint with HUD. Now, if I were an agent or just even on a personal level, sometimes you don't know you're offending somebody. So and you don't know how somebody relates or identifies. So that's where it could get tricky. So you do have to be aware of that. And with your marketing, that's what we'll be going over. I am no expert. I'm learning this too. I don't personally market to sell or have a buyer buy real estate. I'm at the closing end. All professionals, loan officers, lending, this FHA applies to everybody. But this, for your purposes, we will go over the marketing aspect to help you get some knowledge on what's safe and what's not. So I am a realtor. I live by the code. So under Article 10 and related standards of practice, realtors shall not deny equal professional services to any person or persons for reasons of, okay, we're talking about these two categories. Any of these reasons, you cannot discriminate in your practice on the protected classes, okay, in any way, shape, or form. So we'll go over some scenarios, and you can see how it can play out, see what you would do. And standard of practice, same premise. I mean, the fact that you have to that this is a topic where you should be educated or told that you should not be discriminating, harassing speech, hate speech, slurs on any of the protected classes. I mean, that's something hopefully we're doing in our daily lives overall, but especially as agents, okay? So unlawful targeting. Does everyone understand the concept? Meaning you can't have marketing strategies on prospective clients, membership or non-membership, in any of the classes protected by FHA. Okay, does everyone understand that? I don't know what your marketing plans are, and how you market clients, and how you speak to clients, how you look to focus on, even when you're representing a client, you can't do certain things that will also be a violation of FHA to help a buyer find a house. When you're listing a house and your seller's involved, you're the fiduciary agent of your seller, so you also can't be committing any FHA violations when you're representing your seller. So if your seller's committing an FHA violation and you're their agent, there's consequences. So we're going to look at that with the marketing. So unlawful marketing is really the premise of the DEI, okay? And then there's the lawful targeting, which is the one you want to focus on, right? So what you could do under the law to target, to make a business plan, to look for houses for your buyer or when you're listing what you can and can't do, okay? So one example, you can focus on a property-related niche, okay? So there are a lot, even though you feel like the unlawful targeting is such a broad concept. If you look at what you can do and what you should be doing, then I think you are for sure erring on the side of caution where you are not committing FHA violations. So focusing on a property-related niche, fixer-uppers, condominiums, single-family homes, resort housing, properties in foreclosure. So your REO transactions, real estate owned. Airbnbs, environmental friendly buildings. Homes on the historic register. Maybe golf course communities, not so much here. Other states do have that. Does this make sense, focusing on the property-related, your marketing plan, when you're representing a buyer, what their criteria is looking for a house, nothing to do with their protected class. Okay, that's one, lawful targeting. Okay, focus on specific needs of a client that aren't covered by Fair Housing Act. Relocation, you have people relocating all the time for work, maybe military. You can have a niche saying you're a relocation specialist. Has nothing to do with a protected class. Interest in living near hobbies or sports offerings. Some enthusiasts out there are looking for certain areas based on a lifestyle. It's another target area that's lawful versus unlawful. First-time buyers, another group. Okay. And then you can focus on your skills, such as language. This could be a little tricky, though. Does anyone know how it could be a little tricky? You guys are really quiet. Don't be shy. Okay. I won't bother you guys. Okay, so if you pitch your service to the population at large, you're okay. So if you have a language you speak, it's okay if you do market that as a specialty, but you can't do it offensively. Okay, so you just can't do it to those who speak your language. You can't just advertise and exclude others. Okay, and like I said in the beginning, I am not an expert in this. I know it's a slippery slope. There are times where there will be circumstances you don't know, is it FHA violation, is it not FHA violation, especially when you have your marketing plan. But as we go through the other slides, I do give resources that you can use as an agent to educate yourself, because like I said, this is a evolving topic and evolving matters as time passes. So it's something you really need to stay up to speed with. So you can focus on your skills as long as you're doing it at large. Okay, so discrimination in advertising and marketing. Okay, so a lot of this should not be news breaking, but once again, I do go over it. I don't know, I don't look at the descriptions on property listings. I'm not drafting the descriptions on property listings. This is where you guys come into play. If you're reading it as an agent or you're drafting it as an agent, if you see something that another agent's doing, you may want to be courteous. Let your broker know to let the other broker know, talk to that agent. Because some people just are doing it innocently, but they could be committing an FHA violation. Okay, so you cannot use, the list is extensive, but a lot of people typically they default to these words to try to sell a property. And these words are a violation under FHA, discrimination in advertising and marketing. Okay, so what could somebody put instead of an in-law? What would be another description that you could think of that's not insulting? Does everyone understand why in-law is insulting? Correct. Everyone's married. It's implying family status.
Multi-generational.
I would stick to the property. Large finished basement or attic, wherever the in-law is. Typically in-law is put at the bottom. But your extended living, you're describing the property. Large basement with full-size windows, something to describe the property. Bright finished basement. Obviously make sure it's legally finished basement. That's a whole nother topic. But that takes away the negative connotation of in-law for those who are insulted or offended because they don't need that in-law. Walkout. What about a walkout? That's disability. The disability, FHA, disability, ADA, that's a whole nother law and regulation that falls under the FHA umbrella. Walkout, there are people that cannot walk. You cannot use that description. So ground level, access to the ground level, like no stairs, if you're describing, because and like I said in the beginning, you're not drafting or marketing something to offend anyone, but indirectly you may be. So you have to think about it.
And those are the two that get used most often, in-law and walkout.
They've been used forever, really.
So what would you put if a house that has basically a walkout basement because the basement floor, because the house is built on a hill?
Correct, that's my house. And I think about that. You would put ground access, no stairs. So you're not going to put walkout, no boat.
Because in-law is because it's certain you can have an apartment on a house, but it has to be a relative. You
Right.
can't rent it to a non-relative, so what do you put there?
Right, so you would have to be careful with what you're putting in. If you're, in your example right there, are you saying it's a legal live-in if it's family? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not zoned for, you're saying it's not zoned.
For rental, like it's not, so there are the properties that have the variance where, I just actually did a closing on that the parent of the owner was allowed to live in the basement because the variance allowed it. It wasn't for a rental. But you would say live-in opportunity, you have to stay away from in-law. Bachelor pad, that's implying single status. Yes. Accessory unit. Yeah, so that's 50, so I didn't go over the exemption. So that list of protected classes, there are limited exceptions to the protected classes, one of which are the designated, official designated elderly community, 55 plus, and that's not just because you think it is, it's because it actually is. And the Miss Murphy exception, which if owner-occupied elderly person is living on the property, multifamily up to 4 units, and they are looking to rent the unit, they can legally not rent to families with children because of the elderly concern of the noise. Then it's almost like a nuisance because children can be really loud and we love them, but if you're elderly living in a property, you don't necessarily want them above you banging all over the place on the floor, so that is allowed. But you can't advertise, be just like no children allowed. You're not necessarily going to put that in your advertisement either. If you're an agent representing an elderly person that's listing their house for rent, so you would still want to be careful with that, but they can decide not to rent because of it.
What about the master? The whole thing with the
Master bedroom, that's another one.
I know. I asked that. I'm surprised it's not. An MLS.
This is not an exclusive list either, by any means. This is just, I threw some words out there just for discussion.
I asked my broker that, and he said that MLS is still allowing it.
Yeah, so MLS may still allow it. Now, this is all fresh, cutting edge. People are using these words. We see them. Unless and until there is a whole situation from maybe the beginning where some buyer feels that they were discriminated, and they start from, if you put all the facts together, the listing said in-law or some implied some family status, then the property is not sold to them for some reason, and that buyer feels that they were discriminated as a protected class, they're going to look at all the facts. At which point, maybe if the words they use in the description that's being used as evidence for their discrimination case, that's when MLS or whoever else will decide we're not using that description anymore. So these are the slippery slopes where there's not case law. I mean, I can't quote anything or tell you if I read your listing that you're going to be sued. I mean, you're opening yourself up for liability, whether or not it surfaces. It's a different story. It will eventually. Does someone have a hand up? Wow.
A lot of the older properties are just not handicapped accessible, I mean, is that what it is?
Reasonable accommodation. So that's the other thing with ADA. So if you guys like that other course, I could teach you that goes over all this stuff. But if you have a buyer buying a condo, they're in a wheelchair, there's not a ramp. Now, this buyer feels discriminated, alleges discrimination, which it's an old house. They just didn't put the ramp there. So if the buyer wants to make the offer and put in the offer, wants the condo association to review putting a ramp in, that they're requesting that, the condo association has to take action to be reasonable and consider it. Now, that's step one. Now the consideration is how much money are we talking? Is it going to bankrupt the condo association, especially if it's just a 3-family house? Then the second step is if it's if it's not reasonable monetarily, but now the buyer will agree to pay that cost, they can't deny the sale to the buyer or the transaction to that buyer because there's a way around the issue by the buyer paying for a ramp. So there has to be dialogue there. There has to be an effort made by the seller or the condo association. So
Conversely, if the landlord has made necessary, can you
Improvement.
advertise that it's handicap accessible, or is that getting into a?
no, I don't. So that's not. It's including everybody, those handicapped and not handicapped. So, but that's like my brain teaser. Like I think about how, because I think this through and through. Like so, FHA is there to protect protected classes and not be discriminated against. And with that, there is a lot of marketing, a lot of advertisement, a lot of efforts to promote the protected classes who have been discriminated, like the blacks and how they were prevented from purchasing properties and the what that's done to them as a generation and as a for their history. So now it's like, is that discrimination that they're promoting that, but not the other ones that I had nothing to do with what happened 100 years ago. So it gets your wheels turning, and that's a good question. Can you say handicap accessible?
If the intent is to be inclusive.
Right.
Gosh, we could really go, but under the handicap, and I'll be quiet, is a whole other thing I'm seeing now, is the whole service.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
I know that's another class, but that's becoming
Very, yes. There's a lot about that with the service animal, the therapy animal. So you have, there's 3 categories, and what I'm familiar with it. I can't speak like to a certainty on it, but that is something you have to be aware of as well if you're renting a property and someone has a service animal or a therapy dog or pet or whatever. It doesn't even have to be a dog now. It could be any animal.
They call their service thing
Yes.
water cat. You never heard of that breed?
Yes.
It was a water cat.
Even on planes, I mean, someone had like a peacock that was their therapy animal. See, there's a lot. This class isn't designed to scare you and not make you want to talk, but you get to that point where you start to really question things, and you just have to be safe. And we'll go over some ways to help minimize your liability and what you should have for a marketing plan and advertising plan to be DEI, and then have that with every buyer. So your safest bet, stick to describing the features of the house itself. It will take some mental exercise, but we went over a couple examples. In-law, how you can say in-law versus finished basement, extended living, describe it instead of just saying in-law. So here's some others. Describe the property accurately. Choose adjectives wisely. Avoid the red flag words. If you do Google FHA discrimination, advertising, and marketing, there is a list that one was a lot. There's many, many more words on that. I could see if I can find it. I did have it. It was on an old server. So, but there is a greater list if you want to have that when you're doing your property listings. Include words that add value. Large, bright windows. That's something that could, if you do want to market that, the yard is fenced in with a playground. You don't have to say perfect for your family. Just end it as fenced in, large fenced in yard. Don't say where you can run around. You just large fenced in yard with the playground.
House for sale, come see it. That's what it's going for.
Unique features. That's so you can talk about your appliances, maybe. Anything that's unique with the property. You really are selling the property, right? So keep to the property words, descriptions. This is just punctuation. I don't know about you. For the ones that I've read, sometimes they're just not even grammatically correct. It's poorly written, so you should also just keep that as a side note. The basic information, 3-bed, 2-bath, right? MLS has all of that information. So if you're really restating that in your property description, maybe question if you're really putting together a good selling description for your property. Okay, and then the photos. Just try to use those photos that really maximize the house. And when you're doing it professionally, that should be pretty safe. All right, so what would you do scenarios? So we're going to look at, because there's so much information, and we cannot go over every scenario, there's just a few here. I mean, we only have an hour, and we have down to a half hour. So let's look at some scenarios. The love letter scenario. How many of you have faced the love letters? I mean, that was huge for the past 2 years with the seller's market. I mean, I've seen them. They're amazing. I mean, they're well written. They have photographs. I mean, they're really, there's no bad intention. They're really just expressing to the seller, please pick me for this house, like, and all the reasons why. And they're valid reasons, but you're facing some liability there. Okay, so here's the sample. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jones, thank you for all the time you took away from your home this weekend so my husband and kiddos can come take a look at the space we hope to call ours in the future. I can just picture John and Penny running down the stairs on Christmas morning for the years to come. I can tell you how much you care. I can tell how much care you have put into your home over the years. I love the basement gym space, the sparkling kitchen, and especially the dark blue you chose for the dining room. Thank you for considering my family's offer. Warmly, Ann Smith. So what do you guys think of this letter?
I'm not touching it.
Right. Now, so remember, so now you have both hats, right? You're looking at it from a listing agent hat, so now you've received the offer with the letter. But before we even get to that point, let's talk about the buyer's agent who is with their buyer, and their buyer says, I want to submit a love letter. I was told to do that. I read about it. It's a good idea. I can really get my point across to the seller as to why I want this house. So as a buyer's agent, you have potential liability and exposure there. And this is the greater plan is to have a plan with love letters. Now, of course, if you have a buyer that's adamant in giving that love letter, there's a way to handle that. And then if you have a buyer who takes your advice and your office policy or your maybe individual policy is not to do the love letters, not to submit them, then and you have a buyer that listens to that, then that's also an option. So it could play out a few different ways. But let's assume buyer submits this with their offer. Now the listing agent gets the letter. Now also same premise. What's your policy as a listing agent? You go over this with your seller from the beginning. Writing a listing agreement, it has that the seller shall not commit any FHA violations. Mm-hmm. So that's a perfect time to go over this. And you can say, what is your feelings on this? Can we reject them? Do we reject them? Do you want them? So that's something that's part of your marketing plan initially and business plan. Okay, and then you just take it as you can with the client because every client's different, clearly. So love letters are liability letters. So they are a tactic used by some buyers to stand out to the seller, which we went over, especially in hot markets. They do raise the fair housing concerns and open up real estate professionals and their clients to housing violations. And by describing the many reasons why this seller should pick them, this is where you get into it. It includes personal information revealing characteristics of the buyer, such as race, religion, family status, which could then be used knowingly or even through unconscious bias. This is the family I want in my house. Which, once again, when my mind goes, I'm thinking, it's your house. The foundation of citizenship was based on owning property. You own a house. You lived in it for 30 years. You love your house. You do want another family to go into it. To have the concept of you can't have that as a consideration, I can see both sides. It is troubling and heartbreaking on one level. Maybe that you can't pick it because you want to pass it down to another family because your 5 kids grew up there and you had holidays there. It's a tough pill to swallow in a lot of ways, but I don't make the law, I just got to follow it, I guess. So when you analyze the letter we did, okay, or the sample letter, it not only reveals the potential buyer's familial status, but also their religion, because it says Christmas, okay, both of which are protected characteristics under the fair housing laws. So using protected characteristics as a basis to accept or reject an offer, as opposed to price and terms, would violate the Fair Housing Act. Because in the example, you have the nice sellers that are so happy to be able to pass it down to another family. That's a warm and fuzzy feeling on one hand. But what about if it was they were because of their race? I'm not selling to them because their race is X. Now that's awkward because now you're sitting there as a listing agent like, did they just say that? So you could see how if you accept the letters and it's for good intention, how the bad intention could come into play. So that's why it's a policy you should go over with your broker or your own individual policy. So even without accepting love letter, a seller and potentially the seller's real estate agent may be vulnerable to claims that the FHA was violated any time that the seller decides to sell to a buyer who did not, based on objective criteria, make the best offer. So the purchase price will eventually be available for all to see. So you have to be aware of the liability that love letters do have. And this is where, when you're talking to your seller, even your buyer, you can have the conversation. The offer should be on objective criteria. So a seller may lawfully consider and include such things as the closing date, the finance terms, the inspections, other contingencies, and credit worthiness. But fitting into a neighborhood should not be considered. This is where we are in 2023, and this is where we will continue to be. So the sooner the better if you don't already have a plan in place to deal with the love letters. Will get you on potential hot water and your client, because your clients are relying on you. You're their agent. They don't know. I can tell you, I'm well aware of older generations that make comments about who they want living in their house, and they don't even realize that they are committing an FHA violation. So I do want to, this is a lot of repetitive, but MAR, which I don't know if some of you, I think most of you actually do Massachusetts, they have a form where the seller's instructions regarding buyer's letters and fair housing consideration. It's actually a form that the seller signs at the time of the listing agreement, and you can put it with the listing, that they are not accepting any love letters. So MAR form, RIAR, to my knowledge, last I was aware, they do not have this form. But that doesn't mean you can't create your own. I mean, this is just still an individual decision or a broker decision. But Massachusetts is a little ahead of it, and they have the form right there for the agents to use. Mind your clients, the decision to accept should be based on objective criteria only, okay? If you have the client who insists on giving the love letter, don't help them draft or deliver it. I would say I don't even want to see it. It's your decision. You could submit it yourself if you want. Okay, and then document all offers received and the seller's objective reason for not accepting an offer. So if you do feel, if you're unsure if your seller is committing any FHA violations, you can always speak to an attorney, your broker, but it's safe to document. That's where we go over that too in a few other slides. Keeping documentation and having the same policy for every listing is not just this necessarily just one, okay? Another scenario, you're representing the seller who verbally accepts an offer from your buyers or from buyers. You tell the buyer's agent to send over the purchase and sale for review and signing. Purchase P&S agreements prepared by the buyer's agent and sent to the sellers for review. When your seller reviews the proposed contract to sign it, it reflects all the terms discussed, but the sellers hesitate to sign it. Now, we all know as Rhode Island agents, this is what I call Wild Wild West. I mean, you have the conversation with the other agent. Unlike Mass, with a signed offer, it's like, oh, my buyer will give this purchase price, this closing date, this contingency. The listing agent says, sounds good, put it in a contract, send it over, and then here you go, seller. This is what we talked about. Now, can you sign the contract? And in this scenario, you ask the seller any questions or concerns, and the seller say, we noticed the name of the buyer is Ebony Smith, and we want to know if they are black. Okay, what should you do?
Don't even go there. No, you have to have a very frank discussion with them.
Yeah.
Yep.
That to me is very, no pun intended, that's a real black and white.
Right.
That's easy.
Yes,
The love letter side of things from the buyer is a whole other,
I know.
but that's easy.
This is a straight,
That actually happened in Westerly.
yes, that's my next slide. So we'll go over, and I have I talked to the attorney that represented the plaintiff and got an update on the case because it's from 2020, I think. So what you should do. I mean, I've had this discussion in many classes, and some agents say, I wouldn't even answer. Do I have to answer? I shouldn't answer. It just, I'm sure no one's expecting it, so when you're asked that, you're taken aback. This agent, in the case that did happen, she did answer, and we'll look at what happened. And then, but is it a violation of fiduciary duty to the sellers if you disclose the situation to FHA or to an attorney, to anybody, really? No. Right. No, it's not protected by the confidentiality statute. It's a violation of the law. So it's okay, because the defense of the defendant was that the agent had a fiduciary duty not to say why they didn't want to sell, and that didn't fly either. So this is the complaint in Westerly. So the defendant said they will not sell because of race and color of her skin. Those were her words. And the agent did the right thing here. She did everything right. The whole case landed on her and her affidavit, her testimony, and her actions. Just if anyone's ever put in the situation, which we'll go over again towards the end, agent informed the sellers she cannot continue discussions with them and ceased all further communication with them. She reported the conversation to the broker, and the agent submitted a written affidavit. So the plaintiffs did sue the defendant for FHA violations. The defendants took it off the market, and then they did end up selling it to a white family. And there was basically a settlement. So it did not go to a jury. The defendants did try to come up with every excuse in the book that they weren't discriminating, but it didn't go anywhere. They ended up submitting and agreeing to a settlement. So that is a situation that, like Ed said, pretty black and white. I mean, and that is where it starts, but it gets fuzzier in some circumstances. So being educated, doing what you can, talking to an attorney, your broker, is your best bet. So don't make an assumption, because you could indirectly put some liability on yourself. All right, in this scenario, you meet the buyer for a coffee to discuss the list of must-haves for the property. Before you get into details, there's some small talk. The buyer mentions that over the weekend she went to her cousin's wedding at a nearby synagogue. Once you get back to making a list of the property must-haves, you suggest a neighborhood that is mostly Jewish. Have you done anything wrong? Yes, it is staring, okay? Maybe innocent. I mean, once again, you would think, oh, they're Jewish, they may want to live in a Jewish community. I mean, I don't know if an agent who suggests that really meant to do an FHA violation, but it is. You cannot do staring. And when you see the history of what it was pre-FHA, you could see how you don't want to give an inch, because it could become a huge problem and cause a lot of discrimination, unintended or not.
The conversation, we had a listing where the buyers came in and they wanted a synagogue within a certain distance. And I mean, to me, that seemed like a reasonable request. I don't know if that's really starting to get into that gray area.
Right. We'll go over how to handle when your buyers want certain neighborhoods or school districts. So it's steering. The process of pushing buyers one way or another based on any protected class is known as steering, strictly off limits. Agents can't try to direct a buyer only to certain neighborhoods based on your own or assumed race or ethnicity. By the same token, by law, agents cannot answer questions about ethnic makeup of a neighborhood. So, for example, buyers should not ask an agent to show them homes in neighborhoods made up of certain race. So the buyers you can't encourage that for the buyer either, as the buyer's agent. And we'll talk about how to handle that. I think the last scenario, then we'll look at some tools to prepare yourself for this topic, and then you just do your best from there. Buyer scenario. Buyer's agent sitting with a buyer, AJ. The agent calls a listing agent to set up a showing on a property AJ is interested in. Buyer tells listing agent that she is sitting with her buyer, AJ, and he would like to see the property tomorrow at 6 p.m. The listing agent says, no problem, see you then. When the buyer's agent hangs up the phone, AJ says, you misgendered me. I am not a he, I am a she. Did you do anything wrong?
No, because you didn't know. Sorry. I mean, you apologize and you move on.
Right. So that's how you should handle it, okay? And then from that lesson that you have and that experience you have, right, because learning is a lot of experiences. You should try, and I teach a lot, and I speak to a lot of professionals, like other clients over the phone. I try to always be neutral about everything, gender neutral. Even for deeds now, which has been a few years, you should not be putting a husband and wife as tenants by the entirety. It's married couple, spouses. You should not be using husband and wife. The law actually now recognizes the other terminology. So it's happening so fast. It's innocent. You say he. You think he is a he, but he doesn't identify as that. You don't know that. You didn't do anything wrong. You apologize. You say you'll do better, and thank you for letting me know. And then maybe if you're unaware, when you're meeting a client, depending on how you're getting business, if they're leads, if someone you know, then you know it's safe to say. But you can always do intake forms, and you could ask. Just a general, and that's another tool that you could have when we go over the ending slides with how you should handle neighborhood schools, maybe how they identify. You can ask so that you could say, I want to just make sure I don't make any assumptions. That's it, because you don't know what you don't know, but you should ask. All right, this is the last one. You're in the office and get a call from a potential buyer. The buyer speaks Spanish, and though you remember some basics from high school, you know there'll be a language barrier. How do you handle the potential buyer? Meaning, could you say, I don't speak Spanish, can't help you? Figure it out.
Yeah, because
Let them know.
I don't think, if they're coming to you, they want to work with you, and you're just going to have to find a way
Right.
to get over that.
Yes. You could get family member of the buyers to interpret. You can ask, hire a professional interpreter, use someone on your team, or even Google Translate. Google can keep up with how fast someone like me talks, but maybe, I don't know. But that's something, once again, it will happen, and in maybe not that exact capacity, but some situation that is not as black as white, saying I'm not selling to this race. However, you're going to have a situation where you say, wait a minute, is this a protected class? Am I doing anything wrong if I do this or I don't do this? So you have to just have the awareness of it, okay? So the foundation, embracing diversity, okay? So we'll conclude with some DEI, and then I'll give you some tools and some resources. Doing okay on time. All right, so know the importance of embracing diversity on both a professional and personal level to grow a thriving and inclusive real estate business. So this is the fancy way of saying, you know, you're here as professionals, but everyone has personal biases or just things they don't realize. You have to check in with yourself personally and then make sure you're carrying that forward in your personal career as well. Okay? Being aware of cultural concepts and social categories that will help you better understand, relate to, and engage with clients in our diverse real estate market. And think about the diverse community in the United States and the increasing buyer power in the real estate market. So these mean you have to stay with the current times. You have to take courses like this. You have to do independent studies and research just to be aware. You have to have conversations with other agents. Okay, we're all in it together. We all have to learn together. Building an inclusive business, understanding the basic competencies to earn the confidence of potential buyers and sellers regardless of the protected classes. Okay, build a business plan that minimizes risk and successfully services all types of clients. And then developing cultural and personal biases that may inhibit you from fully embracing diversity and creating a successful multicultural real estate business. So this awareness, once again, education is key. Bias override and inclusive multicultural marketing. So learn as much as possible about the traditions and beliefs of your potential clients. Don't assume that all minorities are alike. Acknowledge mistakes like we did on the misgender. Build your team of diverse language speakers. Be sensitive about cultural differences, because something that may not matter to you does matter to somebody else, and you can offend your buyer just doing it that way with nothing to do with the sale, but it's not going to keep them as a client, and you may get a complaint against you. Getting involved in the community. There are a lot of community events, too, that you could participate in. Consider hiring a specialty advertising agency. They are out there. They're online. You can find them. NAR has a lot on their website. And this will talk about your, be prepared to be a source of resources, okay? This is where objective and reliable information so clients can independently decide about a school or neighborhood. You don't want to say, this is a good school district, this is a good neighborhood. You should not be saying that. That's not safe, okay? But they're coming to you as the real estate expert. They want to know. So you're just a source of resources, okay? And how do you do that, okay? So creating templates, inserts, and printed information to be used with every client, okay? So this is your business plan. This is your practice. This is what you do automatically. It's going to take some time. Maybe if you have a team and you do it together, do it with your broker. So by having templates, inserts, printed information to be used with every client, all clients receive the same information, and you're creating a source of resources, an info pamphlet that provides clients with the various information on school board, municipal offices, phone numbers, census.gov. So you're letting them know these are the schools in the area you're looking for. You're not saying this school's better than this school. The test scores, there's more to schools than test scores. Somebody may be looking for a certain art project, a program, certain like musical, sports. So this is something that just giving them this information, letting them do their own research. Some agents go as far as saying, I know the superintendent, they can hook you, you can get in contact and have a meeting with the principal or the superintendent. So being the source of resources, not making up their mind for them or steering them in a certain direction. Does that make sense? So FHA definition of advertising, keep in mind that this includes almost everything written or verbal, okay? Facebook just settled a huge lawsuit with FHA because think about it, how many of you advertise on Facebook? Boost a post, do something. What are you putting in there? A lot of criteria, and a lot of the criteria is a protected class, and Facebook was settled. They didn't admit, but they settled with their advertising policies. They have to change now. So when you are doing any type of advertisement, that's your unconscious bias. You're thinking like, you're thinking what this buyer wants or doesn't want, and you're putting in search criteria, or you're boosting a post based on certain search criteria that's just appealing to a protected or non-protected class. So you have to be careful. The FHA definition is extremely broad. So this is where even if you don't know you're doing it and you do it, you will be, you can be violated, and Facebook was. So tips for your marketing. So that was your business plan as one tool. Your advertising, focus on the property amenities, not on your ideal buyer or renter. Don't make statements that have the effect of excluding individuals of a protected class from your advertising. Avoid restricting your advertisements only from reaching certain individuals or audiences. So that's your platform. You have to be aware there's so many ways to advertise now, and you may not even know you're discriminating in your advertising by using certain features allowed in platforms that are still out there. If you use pictures of people in your advertisement, make sure the advertisement includes individuals reflective of the population in the area where the advertisement is placed. You don't want to mislead people, so you have to be, if you are doing something with an advertisement with pictures. You can, in your advertisement, include equal housing opportunity or the fair housing logo, so that so to signify your commitment to fair housing to your audience. And HUD will also consider this language when determining your fair housing compliance efforts. So this is another factor where if you have the same policy with every client, you have the same information you give to every client, you have the same procedure with the love letters, without the love letters, you have your advertisement that you will abide by fair housing. That's another message. And you have to be familiar with the state and local fair housing, because some states are broader than FHA, because FHA is federal. Then you have your states, and Massachusetts, Rhode Island with the rentals, and when you can decide if, or when you're taking a rental application, it should really just be their qualifications of whether they could pay the rent or not. So that's basically their credit worthiness. All right, so code of ethics and following the law. You have to remind your client, buyer and seller, it's the duty of you and your client to follow FHA. So you can have no policy to discriminate. You have no policy. Your policy is not to discriminate. So you have to communicate that to them. You have to, just like that agent did in the case in Westerly, discontinue representation of any client who made a statement or taken an action in violation of the fair housing. Okay. There was another question some agent asked if, with the cameras now, you have the cameras and the audio. So your seller can be watching people in and out, and your seller says to you, oh, this offer, which one was it? You have to pay attention to that. I mean, if you don't, are you encouraging discrimination? I mean, yes. If you get the sense that your seller is looking to exclude a protected class because they were watching the videos and they know who was visiting or looking at the property. So that's something that isn't a blatant statement. I'm not selling to them because of their race. That's where you're like, wait a minute here. Remember we had that discussion. We should be looking at offers, and you would know if that set of buyers has the best offer based on objective criteria, and your seller is, I don't want to go with that offer. I mean, that's a red flag right there. So you have to be aware. You will report a situation to your broker, document the situation in writing, including what actions you took in response to your client's violation. If you're unsure, talk to broker, consult with an attorney. And in addition to the best practices, it's always a good idea to include a clear statement of your commitment to upholding fair housing laws in your listing agreements as well, and other communications with clients. These efforts, along with reminders to clients of their own obligations under the fair housing laws, will go a long way in protecting you from legal liability and help prevent FHA discrimination. So some resources, if any of you are interested, a lot of resources I got, some of the suggestions that are on these slides. NAR was huge. You can go right to this website. There's endless information. They have a town called Fairtown in Connecticut. It's a pretend location, and it's an hour to an hour and a half of all different situations that you could take, and you get a certificate. You could get certain accreditation for this area. They also have At Home with Diversity, and the cost for At Home Diversity certification designed to enable you to work successfully with and within a rapidly changing multicultural market. It will help you learn diversity sensitivity, how it applies to U.S. fair housing laws in your business, ways to develop professional guidelines for working with people in the increasingly multicultural real estate market. And here's the contact for that if you did want to sign up for it. If you go onto the NAR website and just put this right in the search, it will come up. It's online, and there's sometimes local in person. This is a great source for the source of being a source of resources. This has all property information. So you can give this information, this tool to your client so they could do their own diligence and figure out what schools are in the area, what the neighborhood is like, what the crime rate is like. That's for them. The buyer can go do their independent research, don't have anything to do with something that could appear like staring or discriminating. Okay, so this is a website that you should, if you have a sheet that is your policy now, if you use anything, this is a really useful site. And then this course, which is FHA's 3-hour course online or in person, bias override. This is where you get to know about yourself and how you stereotype and what the pitfalls are. So it's a course that you could take to learn about yourself and what any potential biases are that you don't realize. Will you raise your hand?
A question. Based on that Westerly issue that
Yes.
took place, it's very clear that names many times can reveal
Yes.
an ethnicity or whatnot, or even like when you see the address on the PNS where they live right now.
Yep.
So would you suggest that when presenting offers, we redact that information and just show them everything else? Just so that the sellers, even from the internal bias, don't fall into that trap.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's a good, it would,
I know,
but yeah, if you had a delicate conversation with your seller and they felt like they had some innate or unconscious biases, and they were like, just give me the objective criteria on each one, and they wanted that, then, I mean, if you have that in writing that that's what they want with the list, because I know, right, even with highest and best, I know some agents would tell me they would have the pile of contracts. Some of the agents would even do an Excel spreadsheet and put all the terms and plug it all in and say, this is what we're looking at, which is nice from just looking at all the terms of nothing to do with who the people are.
Right.
Ultimately, like, to withhold it, I don't think you necessarily can, because you do have to give it to them. So, I don't know, I mean, it would, if you have them all and the name's on there and you think your seller's going to reject the offer because of the name, now really it becomes your responsibility to say, I can no longer represent you, document it, and terminate the relationship, and then even report it.
It's a slippery slope, because it's gonna come out eventually.
Yeah.
So if you've already agreed to that
Yes.
offer, oh boy, now what?
Yeah, and then they see the name, because that's what happened. Because in that case, there was actually 2 offers going on, 2 verbals, and then they ended up, they rejected both, and they countered, and the plaintiffs agreed to the counter offer, and then that's when they put it in writing and they saw the name. So, I mean, to say in practice you won't give your seller documents that show the name or the address, I mean, I think that's it's not a bad idea. I just don't know if you're legally obligated to show them it. I mean, they're going to have to see it, and then when they do see it, I think you're preventing the inevitable if they then say, because they're not necessarily going to be truthful with you. They're going to say, oh, you know what, we've kind of changed our mind. We like the other one. Now you're like, oh boy, did I try to avoid something that I'm now just dealing with?
Right, okay.
So, not a terrible idea, but I just don't know if it would work out.
So you had showed us a couple of sites where the buyers could go to get information.
Yes.
For school systems, and listen, schools are great. You know, in Rhode Island, we all know, the top 3 school systems are North Kingston, East Greenwich, Narragansett. Those are the top 3 based on X, Y, and Z ratings. They come to us looking for this information. If we go to that website and I provide them the information and they say, where does this school rate in Rhode Island? And I say, all right, we're in Warwick. It's the 46th best school out of 100. Where does it fall, like, where I'm steering? You know, they come to us for this information.
Right.
They come to us for our guidance.
I know,
And-
that's 100% accurate. And I think what happens is if they're saying the ratings for test scores and you get this neutral site and you do the due diligence versus them, then that's where, in that instance, you could potentially be doing something wrong because you're doing it for them. I would, even though there may be no bad intention, if the practice was, here's the website, this is what you would plug in, you give them the vehicle to drive to get the information they're looking for, and they make that decision on their own. Or you say, okay, this is a website, and here's the link that's going to show you the rankings of test scores, and there's other factors you may want to consider that the schools have to offer that may not be ranked top 10. But those top 10 may not have that drama department or something.
Yeah, I know it. It's just, I feel like people come to us because they want our knowledge, our expertise, our knowledge, you know.
Yep.
You live in East Greenwich, you know this. You live in Warwick, you know that. Are they going to say, you know what, this guy doesn't know anything about what I want? And
Right.
they're going to go to that guy. Or this woman, or, you know.
I know.
It's,
It's believe
You
me.
like lose your credibility.
Yes.
you have no credibility because you have no knowledge. Yet you have the knowledge, but you can't give them the knowledge.
If you're giving objective criteria, I think arguably, and you leave it at that and you don't make the statement, this is the best school,
Right.
I think you're safe. I mean, until there's an example where you're facing some type of, or instance where you're facing some type of alleged discrimination.
Right.
But if you let them know, I understand your question, I do know the areas, I'm just going to give you the objective criteria. I'm not going to draw an opinion or point you in a direction because That's not my position. I give you the facts, you make the decision. If you even put that in an email, then you're just delivering the information if you don't want to look like that lazy agent that says, here's the websites, go look for yourself.
Yeah, that's the
But the same thing with crime. If they say, well, how's this neighborhood? If they see an address, I mean, I even these days, I don't want to misspeak, or I'm afraid to speak about things because you don't want to look like you're discriminating. But if someone says South Providence, like buyers from Boston or Mass called, and they're like, we're looking to be investors, we see some properties in South Providence, what do you think about that neighborhood? And I'm just like, well, like, in my mind, it's probably not where I would want to live, but I can't say that. You just say, if you go on Providence website, you can see the crimes and the information that
Right. Or
may
can
help
call
you
the
decide.
local police department and they can help you with that.
Right,
Right, that's what I was.
right. So if you deliver the message where you don't want to look like the lazy agent, and you say it objectively and don't draw the conclusions for them, I think I think it's okay. I mean, until some, right,
Again, we're just facilitating the information.
yes,
And you can just go do it with them,
right,
and let them make their own
Right.
decision, but guide them.
yes, because that's what they are looking at you for, that type of stuff, as well as the actual property. They're looking at the things surrounding the property. So it's an interesting time, and it's a delicate time. You just have to do the best, and if you do that with every client too, and that's your system, then I think it would be okay unless something changes where it's not. So those are the resources, just 3. And if you go on the website, there's countless more. I thought those were pretty interesting. I did take one as well. I did a lot of simulations and interactive opportunities that they have on their website. So that's and this is the information for this course. So that is the end. Okay, so I think we stayed right on time. No, it was a lot. Thanks for coming. Yes. Yep.
Should a loan program be a defining factor that could be discriminatory? So it's highest and best is usually the offer.
Yep.
You have to go for, right? Could a loan program be discriminatory based upon what they're choosing? So it had, for instance, Rhode Island Housing, it's compared to FHA, that's compared to conventional, that's compared to VA.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was higher than the other, but they didn't choose that program based upon it because one of the other programs might be for lower income borrowers or might be down payment assistance programs. Could that be discriminatory that way?
To my knowledge, I would say no. If that's so, like with the VA, there's the wood destroying insect, the well test, even with FHA, the peeling paint. If you have a buyer that's offering $200,000 VA loan and then a buyer that's offering $190,000 cash, I would say if the seller picks because of just the objective criteria and just that alone, the $190 cash buyer, it's not discriminatory that they said I went with the cash buyer over the finance buyer. If you then start to pull it apart and say, okay, I have all finance buyers, now your VA or FHA, they have inspections or they waive it, but every seller should be informed. The appraiser is still going to check for peeling paint or the well test. And then if that seller says, you know what, I do not want to be bothered with dealing with potentially some type of health and safety issue that I have to fix in order to sell to this buyer, and I have a conventional that is maybe still less money but a less strict loan, then I think that's at this time, I think that's the seller's decision.
That discussion almost every day. Yeah, I mean, you're giving them all the objective criteria
Right.
for each particular loan, right?
And what it means for that seller to say yes, because then they're going to say to you, well, geez, Ed, you didn't tell me that I have to fix the paint, now, the peeling. And I've had 3 of them just last month. The appraiser went out, peeling paint. Now the weather does, even though the weather's been pretty nice, but the weather doesn't permit the contractor to fix the paint. So now they have to have money in escrow. They have to delay the closing. And now the seller's unhappy. It's backed up to another transaction. So I think for now, the financing types of loans and all those factors are a valid decision for a seller to weigh for a,
Say one's better or worse, but here's all.
right.
Here's what happens with each one.
Yes, exactly. So That's the way, exactly, don't say, I would never say or encourage anyone to say the VA buyers, forget about it, because that's not true either. They have 100% financing, the credit scores are lower, and you also say that. The VA buyer, may have some strict terms in this regard, but then there are looser terms in this regard. So it's just something else to describe in detail to your seller that will help them make a decision that's legal. Any other questions?
Just a
Oh,
quick
yeah.
one. I have some clients who are getting married at the beginning of June. So it's been an issue in regards to when we request a closing. I'm like, well, it could be mid-May or mid-June because they're getting married. Should I not be saying because they're getting married
To who, I
to
mean,
the listing agent? I mean, is that, are they gonna use that as, I don't know.
like, yeah, I know, you get paranoid. But no, if it has to do with the time, that personal life and the timing of the closing,
Right, and I'm revealing that, whatever, they believe in the sanctity of marriage.
Right.
I don't know what I'm saying.
yes. I know, I know.
And they'll
So,
see that they're a man and a woman.
Right.
If that's okay, so. am I-
but are you saying it because are they already under contract? Or you're
Well,
negotiating?
whenever I'm submitting an offer,
Oh, I see.
we're on 3 now,
Oh.
it's been, in order to negotiate a better offer, I'm like, we're flexible, but we can't do early June because of this.
Yeah.
So am I,
Yeah, I would even omit, just say the buyers are not able to close the first 2 weeks of June.
vague? Okay.
Right. Yes,
I think so.
right.
I think so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I start to rethink everything, believe me.
Analysis paralysis.
Yes. I mean, yes, so I think, but that's a perfect example where you're thinking like, okay, I'm just having this conversation, but now you say, well, I don't know if that information is necessary. I will just say they can't, the closing date can be this or that, and that's that. So, yeah. But you guys have my email if anyone has any questions or any follow-up to the class. But thanks for attending.
On that standpoint too as well, this goes beyond even for the realtor standpoint. We go to lending as well. The loan officers like Joe and I are restricted from having any photos directly in the application because it could create prejudice during the transaction. When an appraisal is done, they actually take away, they blur out any photos directly in there because it could be prejudice directly towards the individuals inside there. So this continues on, and we all deal with it, and we deal with the same. FHA rules and regulations are universally across the board for all of us. So we got to pay attention to these things too as well as we go. Because we can't put anything. We can't put love letters to an underwriter either based upon a situation. And say, hey, they marry. I'm like, you're not allowed. We're the same fundamentals that we have to do that you guys have to do when we go across the board. One thing, Jen.
Oh, yeah, no,
That was
thank you.
fantastic.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Aren't aware, my name's Anthony.